The cold wind whipped across the wide, empty plains, carrying with it the first snowflakes of the season. The cowboy's horse trudged slowly through the thin layer of snow, hooves sinking into the frozen ground. Each step made a soft crunching sound, and the horse's breath formed little clouds in the icy air. The cowboy wrapped his worn coat tighter around his shoulders, but the chill still bit through, creeping down to his bones. He shivered, pulling his hat lower over his eyes, wishing for the warmth of a fire. But there was nothing for miles. Only the endless stretch of snow, broken now and then by rocks or small hills. He had been riding since dawn. The sun had barely risen when he had left the small town behind, hoping to reach the next settlement before nightfall. But the weather had changed quickly, faster than anyone could have expected. The clouds had grown dark and heavy, and by midday snow had begun to fall. Now the sky was a dull gray, and the snowstorm had grown stronger, hiding the horizon in white. The cowboy could barely see more than a few yards ahead. His horse snorted nervously, stamping its hooves to shake off the snow that was settling on its back. The cowboy patted its neck. "Easy, girl. We'll find shelter soon," he said softly. His own voice sounded small and weak against the roar of the wind. He had been through tough winters before, but nothing like this. The wind seemed to pierce deeper than ever, and every step felt heavier. Suddenly, a shadow moved near a group of rocks ahead. The cowboy squinted, unsure if it was his imagination or something real. Another gust of wind blew, and he caught a glimpse of a figure. A woman stepped out from behind the rocks, her long hair dark against the snow. She wore a simple dress made of thick cloth and hides, and she moved with a quiet confidence. She waved her hand and called out, her voice clear and firm even against the wind. "Cowboy, we are shivering. Get in my shelter now." The cowboy froze. He had been alone all day, seeing no one, and now this stranger was calling him out of the storm. His heart beat faster, both from the cold and the sudden surprise. He had heard stories of the Apache people, stories that spoke of courage, strength, and kindness, but also of caution. He was not sure if he could trust her. The snow swirled around him, making it difficult to think clearly. The woman stepped closer, her eyes meeting his. There was no fear in her expression, only urgency and concern. He noticed her hands were slightly red from the cold, but she did not hesitate. She seemed determined, as if she had been expecting him. The cowboy felt something in her gaze, a mix of command and care that made him nod. He guided his horse carefully toward her. As he approached, the wind seemed to howl louder, but she did not flinch. She led him to a small opening between the rocks, barely visible from a distance. Inside there was a fire flickering, its warm light contrasting sharply with the icy white around them. The flames danced, casting shadows that moved like spirits along the walls of the shelter. The smell of burning wood mixed with the crisp air, and the cowboy's heart lifted. Finally warmth, finally protection from the storm. The shelter was simple but sturdy. It was made of rocks stacked together, with hides stretched across the openings to keep out the wind. The floor was covered with straw and blankets, and the fire in the center gave off a gentle heat that slowly reached his chilled fingers and toes. The woman gestured for him to bring the horse closer, and he did, tying it to a post near the entrance. The horse shook itself and pawed the ground, happy to be out of the storm. Inside he saw that the woman was not alone. A few other figures moved quietly near the fire. Elders and younger women, all wrapped in warm clothing, watched him carefully. The cowboy removed his hat and rubbed his face. His hair was wet from the snow and his cheeks burned from the cold. He felt a strange mix of relief and nervousness. He had survived many dangerous situations, but this was different. He was in the middle of the wild land, surrounded by people he had just met, and he had no idea what the night would bring. The woman gave him a small smile, and it was the first warmth he had felt that had nothing to do with the fire. "Sit by the fire. You must be freezing," she said gently. Her voice had a calm authority, the kind that made people listen without question. The cowboy nodded and moved closer to the flames. He could feel the heat slowly seeping into his frozen body, and he let out a long breath he didn't realize he had been holding. As he warmed his hands and feet, he looked around the shelter. The walls were lined with simple tools and supplies. Animal hides hung to dry, and small bundles of herbs and food were tucked into corners. It was clear that this place had been prepared carefully, a safe haven against the harsh land outside. The cowboy realized that the woman and her people had survived the wilderness for a long time, learning to live with the wind, the snow, and the dangers of the Wild West. The wind howled outside, rattling the hides that covered the openings. Snow drifted against the rocks, piling up and blocking the view of the outside world. The cowboy felt a strange sense of peace despite the storm. Here, in this small hidden shelter, he was no longer alone. The danger was still outside, but inside he felt warmth, safety, and human connection, the kind that could carry a person through the worst of nights. The woman knelt near the fire, pulling a blanket from a bundle and offering it to him. "Cover yourself. You must rest," she said. The cowboy took it, feeling the soft fabric against his chilled skin. He wrapped it around his shoulders and sat back, allowing himself a few moments to simply exist without fear. For the first time all day, he felt a little hope. Outside, the storm continued, relentless and loud. But inside, the fire crackled. Shadows danced on the walls, and the small group of people moved with quiet care. The cowboy realized that this night would not be one of suffering alone in the cold. It would be a night of human kindness, of unexpected help, and of survival in the harshest conditions. He looked at the woman, standing near the fire, her eyes scanning the edges of the shelter, making sure everything was safe. "Thank you," he said quietly. She nodded, a small smile on her face. No words were needed beyond that. Actions had spoken louder than words ever could. She had seen someone in need and had offered him warmth and safety without hesitation. The cowboy knew the night would be long. He did not know what would happen once the storm passed or where his journey would take him. But at that moment, with the fire warming his body and the woman watching over him, he felt a connection to the land and its people. He felt that maybe, just maybe, he could survive this storm and continue on his path. As the snow fell harder outside and the wind howled through the canyon, the cowboy sat quietly, staring into the fire. The shadows flickered across his face, and he thought about the long ride he had taken and the unexpected shelter he had found. He felt the exhaustion of the day in every muscle, but he also felt gratitude. The Wild West was unforgiving, but tonight it had shown him something rare: trust, warmth, and human courage. Hours passed, and the storm did not let up. Yet the cowboy was no longer shivering. He had found shelter, warmth, and a small sense of hope. The woman and her people moved silently around him, tending the fire and keeping watch. Outside, the snow covered everything in white, hiding the rough land and dangerous paths. Inside, the fire glowed, a beacon of life in the cold, harsh world. The cowboy closed his eyes for a moment, feeling the steady rhythm of the fire and the quiet breathing of the people around him. He knew that tomorrow would bring challenges, but tonight he was safe. He thought about the words the woman had shouted when he first saw her. "Cowboy, we are shivering. Get in my shelter now." They had not been just words. They had been a lifeline, and he had accepted it, stepping into a night he would never forget. The storm outside showed no sign of letting up. The snow fell thick and fast, covering the rocks, the ground, and the small paths that led to the hidden shelter. The wind roared through the canyon like a living creature, making the cowboy pull his blanket tighter around his shoulders. He could see the flames from the fire dancing, reflecting in his tired eyes, and for a moment he simply watched. The warmth reached his frozen hands and feet slowly, but he welcomed it, letting it chase away the cold that had gripped him since morning. The Apache woman moved around the shelter, her movements calm but purposeful. She carried a small bundle of kindling and added it to the fire. Sparks flew upward, joining the snowflakes that pressed against the opening. The cowboy noticed how careful she was, how even in the middle of a storm she did not hurry or panic. Every action had meaning. She was not just surviving, she was keeping everyone else safe and warm. "Sit closer," she said to him, her voice gentle but firm. "You must warm yourself fully before the night grows longer." He nodded and shifted nearer to the fire. The heat touched his face and chest, melting the ice in his clothes and restoring some feeling to his fingers. He exhaled slowly, noticing how tense his body had been all day. He had been riding alone for hours, fighting the storm and the cold, and now he realized how much he had relied on this unexpected help. The woman noticed him glancing around the shelter, studying the other people who were quietly moving about. She smiled slightly. "Do not worry. They will not harm you. You are safe here." The cowboy studied her face. There was truth in her words, and he felt it deep in his gut. There was something honest and simple about the way she spoke. Without boasting or exaggerating, she was confident, not because of strength alone, but because she knew the land, the people, and the dangers that surrounded them. Inside the shelter, it was warm but still modest. The floor was covered with straw, blankets, and animal hides, creating small layers of comfort. Around the fire, the other Apache women and elders kept busy. One of the older women stirred a pot of food, its steam filling the air with the smell of dried meat and roots. Another woman adjusted the blankets on the floor, ensuring that everyone had some comfort. The cowboy felt a sense of respect for the way these people worked together, even in a harsh winter storm. Every movement, every small gesture had meaning and purpose. The cowboy removed his wet gloves and rubbed his hands together. He looked at the woman who had called to him outside. "How long have you been out here in this weather?" he asked quietly. She paused for a moment, looking out through the hide covering the opening. Snow swirled around in blinding sheets, and he could see the outline of her figure, steady and unyielding. "Since the storm began," she said simply, "we must always be ready. This land can be cruel, but it is also beautiful. We survive by caring for each other, by being strong together." Her words were quiet, but they carried weight. The cowboy realized that her courage and calmness were not just for show. They were born from years of living in a place where danger was constant, and survival depended on alertness, skill, and trust. He shifted slightly and looked around the shelter again. He noticed small items carefully placed along the walls, bundles of dried herbs, small sacks of seeds, and tools made from wood and stone. Each piece spoke of preparation and thought. The cowboy had traveled many miles, surviving storms and dangers, but he had never seen such careful planning. He felt a growing respect for these people, and for the woman who had welcomed him without hesitation. "Will the storm last long?" he asked, trying to make conversation and calm his own restless mind. She shook her head slightly. "It is hard to say. Sometimes it passes quickly, sometimes it lasts for days. But inside here we are safe. That is what matters." Her words reminded him that safety and warmth were not just comforts, they were lifelines. The storm outside was unforgiving, but here, in this small, hidden space, life was still possible. As the evening grew longer, the cowboy noticed the quiet rhythm of the shelter. The older women hummed softly as they worked. The younger women moved with care and precision, and the fire crackled steadily. Even in the middle of a snowstorm, there was order, patience, and a sense of calm determination. The cowboy realized that he had been so focused on surviving the ride that he had not truly considered what it meant to endure such conditions, to live fully with awareness and care. The Apache woman handed him a small bowl of food, a mixture of dried meat, roots, and a few grains. He ate slowly, savoring the warmth and energy it provided. "You need strength for the night," she said. "The storm is not finished. You must be ready to endure it." He nodded again, feeling grateful not just for the food but for the thoughtfulness behind it. She had not just saved him from the cold. She had given him the means to survive the night fully. Hours passed, and the storm outside grew harsher. The wind howled, and the snow piled higher against the rocks surrounding the shelter. The cowboy sat near the fire, watching the flames, feeling the warmth spread through him. The woman moved quietly among the others, checking the fire, rearranging blankets, making sure everyone remained comfortable. He marveled at her calm strength. There was no panic, no unnecessary movement, only careful attention and steady care. The cowboy felt the tension in his body slowly ease. He had been riding for hours, facing uncertainty and danger, and now he felt a small peace settling in his chest. The shelter was humble, the fire modest, but it offered something he had not felt for a long time: safety. He could hear the soft breathing of the others, the faint crackle of the fire, and for a moment, the storm outside seemed distant, almost like a different world. The woman sat down across from him, pulling a small blanket around her shoulders. "You must rest," she said softly. "Even a strong rider like you needs sleep. Tomorrow you will continue your journey, but tonight you stay here." He nodded, feeling the exhaustion in his muscles, the ache in his back, and the cold that still lingered despite the fire. He felt grateful for this moment, for the kindness of a stranger who had risked her own comfort to help him. As he leaned back against the blankets, he noticed how the firelight reflected in her eyes. There was intelligence there, yes, but also something gentler, compassion. She had seen him struggling alone and cold, and without hesitation, she had called to him. Her courage was quiet, steady, and remarkable. The cowboy realized that in a world that could be harsh and unforgiving, acts of kindness and bravery often came from those who knew the land and its dangers best. Outside, the snow continued to fall. The storm showed no signs of ending, but inside the shelter was alive with warmth, quiet movement, and care. The cowboy felt a growing respect for the woman and her people. They had survived the Wild West for generations, mastering the art of living in harsh conditions with skill, patience, and trust. He had arrived alone and vulnerable, and now he was part of this small world, even if only for the night. The night grew deeper, and the storm raged on. The cowboy closed his eyes for a brief moment, listening to the wind and snow outside. He could feel the fire's warmth on his skin, the blankets around him, and the quiet presence of the Apache woman watching over him. He thought about the long ride, the danger, and the uncertainty that had filled his day. And yet here in this humble shelter he felt hope. For the first time since morning, he allowed himself to relax. He had faced the storm alone, but now he was not alone. The woman had not only saved him from the cold, she had shown him the strength of trust, of quiet courage, and of human kindness in the middle of a wild and dangerous land. The cowboy knew that he would not forget this night. This small shelter hidden among the rocks, and the woman who had called out to him without hesitation. As the fire flickered and the snow piled higher outside, the cowboy leaned back and let himself feel the warmth and the quiet safety of the shelter. The storm would pass eventually, and he would continue his journey. But tonight he was alive because of someone else's courage. He had found trust, warmth, and human care in the most unlikely place, and that, he realized, was sometimes more valuable than any town, any road, or any destination. The snowstorm outside showed no signs of easing. The wind howled across the plains, pushing the falling snow into sharp drifts that hid rocks and low hills from view. The cowboy sat near the fire, feeling the warmth spread through his frozen body. He had begun to regain some strength, but the long ride and the bitter cold had left him exhausted. Every muscle ached and every joint protested with the chill that lingered in the air. He rubbed his hands together again and watched the flames flicker, mesmerized by the way they danced in the dim shelter. The Apache woman moved quietly around the fire, checking the blankets and tending the small pot of food that had been simmering for hours. She worked with a calm precision, making sure that every person in the shelter had something warm to eat and a place near the fire. She noticed the cowboy watching her and gave him a small, encouraging smile. "The storm is harsh, but it will not last forever. Tonight we endure together," she said. Her words were simple, but they carried a weight that went beyond the cold. They spoke of resilience, of community, and of strength in the face of hardship. The cowboy shifted closer to the fire, feeling the heat reach his shoulders and chest. He looked at the other people in the shelter more closely this time. A few women moved about, quietly arranging blankets and checking on each other. An elder sat near the back, wrapped in furs, watching the fire with sharp eyes. The sense of order and purpose was comforting. Even in the middle of a snowstorm, life inside the shelter continued with careful attention and quiet care. He realized that the woman who had called to him outside was not just brave, she was a leader in her own right. Her calm confidence seemed to guide everyone in the shelter, and she did it without raising her voice or giving commands. Everything she did was precise, deliberate, and effective. The cowboy felt a growing respect for her and also a sense of humility. He had ridden through the storm alone, relying on his own strength and skill, but here was someone who had endured the same land countless times, knowing how to survive and help others survive as well. "Do you often face storms like this?" he asked quietly, breaking the silence that had settled over the shelter. The woman glanced at him, her eyes reflecting the firelight. "Often enough," she said simply. "The land is unforgiving and we must always be prepared. Each storm teaches us something if we pay attention. We learn patience, endurance, and the importance of watching over one another." She paused and added, "Tonight we watch over you as well." The cowboy nodded, feeling a mix of gratitude and unease. He had been a lone rider all his life, used to relying only on himself. But tonight he had to accept help. The realization that he was not alone, that someone had risked discomfort and danger to guide him to safety, weighed on him more than the cold ever could. He looked at her again and saw that there was no hesitation in her actions. She had not waited to see if he could survive. She had acted immediately, calling him to shelter without fear. Outside, the storm grew louder. The wind pushed the snow against the shelter with a constant rattling force, making the wall shiver. Inside, the fire crackled and the smells of cooked meat and herbs filled the air. The cowboy realized how hungry he was. He had eaten only a small portion earlier, but now the aroma of the simmering food made his stomach ache with desire for warmth and energy. The woman noticed his glance and gestured toward the pot. "Eat," she said gently. "It will give you strength for the night. You will need it." He scooped a small portion into a bowl and began eating slowly, savoring the warmth of the food. The flavors were simple but rich. Dried meat, a few roots, and grains, all carefully cooked to preserve their energy. He ate in silence, noticing how everyone else in the shelter moved with quiet purpose. The cowboy felt a strange sense of community forming in the small, cramped space. For the first time that day, he realized that survival was not just about strength or skill. It was about trust, care, and attention to others. As he ate, the woman sat near him, her eyes scanning the shelter. "You are safe here," she said again. "No harm will come to you tonight. You only need to rest and recover. The storm will pass." Her voice was calm, steady, and comforting. The cowboy felt himself relax in a way he had not expected. He had spent hours riding through snow and wind, constantly alert for danger. Now in the firelight he could allow himself a moment of peace. The night grew deeper and the storm outside raged with unrelenting force. Snow piled higher against the rocks, blocking the paths and covering any sign of the world beyond. Inside the shelter, the warmth of the fire created a small oasis in the cold and harsh land. The cowboy watched the flames, feeling their energy seep into his body, giving life to muscles that had been frozen and stiff. The woman moved around the shelter, attending to small needs, adjusting blankets, adding kindling to the fire, and checking on the others. Every movement was deliberate, every glance purposeful. He realized that the storm had given him a rare gift. It had brought him to this shelter, to these people, and to the woman who had called out to him without hesitation. He had arrived alone, vulnerable and unsure, and now he was part of a small self-sufficient community. The warmth he felt was not only from the fire or the blankets, it was from trust, kindness, and the knowledge that someone cared enough to act when it mattered most. The cowboy looked at the woman again, seeing the quiet strength in her eyes. "How do you stay so calm in storms like this?" he asked. She smiled faintly. "Because fear does not help. It only distracts you from what matters. We focus on what we can do and we care for those around us. That is how we survive." Her words struck him with the force of truth. He had always faced danger alone, but she faced it with others, guiding and supporting them through it. He felt a pang of admiration and a hint of longing for that kind of steady courage. Hours passed slowly. The fire continued to burn, the storm continued to rage, and the cowboy found himself listening to the quiet rhythm of life inside the shelter. The elders hummed softly as they worked. The younger women moved with careful steps, and the Apache woman remained a constant presence near the fire. The cowboy realized that in this simple hidden shelter, he was witnessing something remarkable. The quiet strength of a people who had learned to survive and thrive in one of the harshest lands in the world. He ate another small portion of the food, feeling his strength return. He shifted closer to the fire, letting the warmth seep into his exhausted muscles. He glanced around at the others in the shelter, seeing the trust and care between them. Each person had a role, each action mattered, and the woman who had called him in was at the center, guiding them without words, simply by being present and attentive. The cowboy could hear the storm outside, relentless and harsh, but inside there was life, warmth, and community. He felt a deep sense of respect for the people who had created this small haven in the Wild West. He realized that survival was not just about riding fast, hunting or hiding. It was about observation, care, and quiet courage. He had been taught these lessons in the hardest way possible, by riding through the storm alone and vulnerable, and then being offered shelter by someone who had seen him struggle and acted without hesitation. As the night pressed on, the cowboy leaned back against the blankets, feeling the exhaustion of the day and the relief of safety. The woman continued to move quietly around the shelter, attending to small needs, always alert. He watched her, noting the calm confidence in her actions. He had survived many challenges, but he had never seen courage and care combined so perfectly. It was a strength born of necessity, of understanding the land and the people, and of living with respect for both. Outside, the storm howled through the canyon, snow piling against the shelter walls. Inside, the fire burned steadily, and the shelter felt like a world apart from the chaos beyond. The cowboy realized that this night, this small haven and this woman who had saved him would stay with him long after he left. The storm might last a few more hours, but inside the shelter he had found warmth, safety, and the quiet reassurance of human care. The cowboy closed his eyes briefly, listening to the sounds of the fire, the wind, and the soft movements of the people around him. He felt the tension in his muscles begin to ease, the ache in his bones soften, and the chill in his body retreat. He was not alone. He was safe, warm, and in the presence of people who understood the land and the storm. And he knew that when he finally stepped out of this shelter, he would carry with him the memory of courage, care, and trust. Lessons learned in the middle of the Wild West during a night of snow and wind. The snowstorm outside continued its relentless march, blanketing the land in white and hiding the rugged landscape from view. The wind whistled sharply through the canyon, rattling the shelter's walls and pushing snow against the hides that covered the openings. Inside, the warmth of the fire contrasted sharply with the cold and chaos outside. The cowboy sat near the flames, feeling the heat soak into his stiff muscles. His body was tired from the long ride and the storm, but his mind was alert, observing the small details of the shelter and the people who had welcomed him. The Apache woman moved calmly around the shelter, checking blankets, stirring the fire, and ensuring that everyone had enough to eat and was protected from the cold. She paused to glance at the cowboy, noticing the way his eyes followed her movements. She gave a small, reassuring smile, one that carried understanding and quiet encouragement. "Rest if you can," she said softly. "Even the strongest rider needs strength to face the day." The cowboy nodded, grateful for the words. He had never expected such care from someone he had met only hours before. In his life, he had traveled long distances, faced storms and dangers, and relied solely on himself. But tonight was different. He had been given warmth, shelter, and protection. He realized that survival was not just about strength, it was about trust, attention, and the courage to help others when it mattered most. As he settled back against a stack of blankets, he noticed the other people in the shelter. Elders watched the fire with calm eyes, their expressions steady and knowing. Younger women moved carefully among the blankets and bundles of supplies, their steps quiet but purposeful. Even in the middle of the storm, there was a rhythm, a sense of order and care that made the shelter feel like a living organism. Every action had meaning, and the cowboy found himself drawn into the quiet harmony of the place. The woman who had called to him outside moved closer to the fire, carrying a small bundle of dried herbs. She added them to the flames, and a soft, fragrant smoke filled the shelter. The smell was soothing, almost like a promise of safety. The cowboy inhaled deeply, feeling the tension in his chest ease. He realized that even in the harshest conditions, small acts could bring comfort and hope. The woman had taught him that lesson without words, simply by moving through the storm with quiet confidence and care. Hours passed slowly, and the storm continued outside, its fury unrelenting. The cowboy watched the snow swirl past the openings, sometimes blinding in its intensity. He could hear the wind tearing through the canyon, and he knew that the world outside was dangerous and unforgiving. But inside, the shelter was alive with warmth, movement, and human presence. The fire flickered, casting dancing shadows on the walls, and he felt a strange sense of peace. For the first time that day, he allowed himself to relax fully, trusting that he was safe. The woman knelt beside him and handed him a small bowl of food. "Eat," she said. "You will need strength for the night. The storm is not yet finished, and the cold is still harsh." The cowboy took the bowl and ate slowly, savoring each bite. The food was simple but nourishing. Dried meat, grains, and a few roots, all carefully prepared. He felt the warmth of the fire and the food spreading through his body, chasing away the fatigue and chill that had weighed on him all day. As he ate, he listened to the soft sounds of the shelter. The elders hummed quietly as they worked. The younger women moved with care, and the fire crackled steadily in the center. There was a rhythm to their movements, a quiet harmony that made the shelter feel like a safe haven in the midst of chaos. The cowboy realized that he had been living a life of solitude, focused on survival alone, and now he was experiencing something different, the power of community and shared purpose. The woman sat across from him, watching the flames and occasionally glancing at the others in the shelter. "You have been traveling far," she said softly. "The land is not easy and the storms are harsh, but here you are safe." You only need to rest and regain your strength. Her words carried a calm authority, one that demanded respect without force. The cowboy nodded, feeling both gratitude and admiration. He had never met someone who combined courage, skill, and care in such a quiet and effective way. Outside, the storm showed no sign of stopping. Snow piled higher against the rocks, covering the paths and the landscape beyond. The wind howled like a living creature, and the cold pressed against the shelter walls. But inside, the warmth of the fire, the movement of the people, and the quiet care of the Apache woman created a bubble of safety. The cowboy realized that this was more than survival. It was a lesson in endurance, trust, and human kindness. As the night grew deeper, he found himself opening up in small ways. He spoke quietly about his travels, the towns he had left behind, and the hardships he had faced. The woman listened, nodding occasionally, her eyes reflecting the firelight. She did not judge or interrupt. She simply listened, offering understanding through her presence. The cowboy felt a connection forming, not just with her, but with the people in the shelter. For the first time in many years, he felt a sense of belonging, even if only for this night. The fire crackled and popped, sending small sparks upward. The cowboy leaned closer, letting the warmth reach his frozen fingers and toes. He watched the woman move among the blankets, checking the others and ensuring that everyone remained comfortable. Her movements were precise and efficient, but there was also a gentle grace to them. She was strong, but her strength was not loud or aggressive. It was quiet, steady, and dependable. He thought about the ride he had taken through the storm, the hours of struggle and uncertainty, and the moment he had seen her standing in the snow. Her call had been direct and urgent, but it had also been an invitation, a lifeline in the middle of a harsh and unforgiving land. He realized that courage was not just about facing danger alone. It was also about offering help when it was needed most. She had shown him that lesson clearly, without words, through her actions. Hours passed slowly, and the storm continued its relentless dance outside. The cowboy felt his exhaustion beginning to melt away, replaced by a quiet determination. He realized that the night would not be easy, but he was not alone. He had found shelter, warmth, and human care in the middle of a wild and dangerous land. The Apache woman had not only saved him from the storm, but she had also shown him a new way to endure, to survive, and to trust. The woman moved closer to the fire again, adding a few more pieces of kindling. The flames jumped higher, casting long shadows on the walls. The cowboy watched her, noticing the calm strength in her eyes. She was not just enduring the storm. She was commanding it in her own quiet way, making the shelter a place of warmth, safety, and life. He felt a sense of awe and respect, realizing that he had never met anyone like her. As the night pressed on, the cowboy leaned back against the blankets, feeling the steady heat of the fire and the quiet care of the people around him. The storm outside raged, but inside there was life, warmth, and community. He thought about the long ride, the cold, and the uncertainty he had faced, and he realized that he had been given something rare, a chance to witness courage, kindness, and endurance in their purest forms. He closed his eyes for a brief moment, listening to the fire crackle, the wind howl, and the soft movements of the others. He felt a deep sense of gratitude. He had survived many storms in his life, but this one had brought him more than safety. It had brought him a glimpse of something greater. The shelter, the fire, the care of the Apache woman, and the quiet strength of the people around him had given him hope, warmth, and a new understanding of what it meant to survive together. The night seemed endless, but within the small shelter, time felt different. The cowboy felt a connection forming, not just with the woman who had saved him, but with the people who had built this safe space in the middle of the harsh land. He realized that courage, care, and endurance were not just individual traits, they were shared, passed from one person to another through actions, attention, and trust. As the storm raged outside, the cowboy leaned back and let himself rest for a few moments. The fire warmed his body, the blankets protected him from the cold, and the presence of the Apache woman reassured him. He knew that the night would continue to be difficult, but he also knew that he would endure it not alone, but with the strength and guidance of those who had offered him shelter, care, and understanding in the middle of a harsh and unforgiving world. The storm finally began to show signs of slowing. The wind's howl became less fierce, and the snowflakes that had pounded the canyon all night now fell gently, almost like feathers drifting from the sky. The cowboy stirred near the fire, feeling the steady warmth still surrounding him. His body was still tired, but the fire had restored his strength, and the blankets wrapped around him like a shield against the lingering cold. He slowly opened his eyes and looked around the shelter, noticing the Apache woman moving with calm precision, checking the others, making sure everyone had enough warmth and food. The sky outside was still gray, but a soft light began to filter through the heavy clouds. It promised the end of the storm, the first hint of sun breaking through after hours of harsh winter darkness. The cowboy felt a stirring of hope inside him. He had been through many storms in his life, but this one had been different. This time he had not survived alone. The kindness and courage of the woman who had called him to the shelter had changed something in him. He had experienced the warmth of trust, the power of care, and the quiet strength of a community bound together in hardship. He looked at the other people in the shelter. The elders had begun to stir, checking supplies and making plans for the day ahead. The younger women adjusted blankets and prepared food for the morning. Everyone moved with calm confidence as if they had survived countless storms before. The cowboy felt admiration for them all. He realized that survival was not only about strength and skill, it was also about wisdom, preparation, and the courage to care for others even in the harshest conditions. The Apache woman approached him with a small bundle of dried herbs and placed it near the fire. "The storm is ending," she said softly. "Soon the world outside will be quiet again. You will be able to continue your journey." Her eyes met his, steady and thoughtful. "You are stronger now, not only because of the food and warmth, but because you have seen what it means to endure with others." The cowboy nodded slowly, feeling the truth of her words. He had learned something he could not have discovered on his own: the value of trust, the power of care, and the courage it took to face hardship without hesitation. The fire crackled softly, and the cowboy stretched his stiff muscles. He had been frozen and weary for hours, but now he felt energy returning. He glanced at the Apache woman, seeing the quiet determination in her eyes. She had faced the storm with others, guiding them, protecting them, and ensuring their survival. And she had done the same for him, a stranger, a lone rider caught in the wild winter. He realized that courage was not always loud or boastful. It was often quiet, steady, and filled with care for those around you. Outside, the snow had begun to melt slightly under the soft light of the rising sun. The landscape was still white and cold, but the harshness of the storm had passed. The cowboy could see distant rocks and hills more clearly now, the outlines of the canyon emerging from the veil of snow. He thought about the long ride that had brought him here, about the cold that had bitten through his coat and chilled him to the bone. And now, he realized, he had found something rare and valuable: warmth, safety, and human kindness in the most unexpected place. The woman motioned toward the entrance of the shelter. "It is safe now," she said. "You may leave when you are ready. Your journey continues and the path is clearer than it was before." The cowboy stood slowly, feeling the stiffness in his legs but also the strength returning to his body. He stepped toward the opening, breathing in the crisp, cold air that was now less harsh than before. Snow crunched under his boots as he moved carefully, watching the soft light of dawn illuminate the rocks and the canyon. He looked back at the shelter, at the Apache woman and the others who had offered him warmth and protection. "Thank you," he said quietly, his voice filled with gratitude. She nodded, a faint smile on her face, and gave a small wave. "Travel safely," she said. "Remember what you have learned here tonight." The cowboy felt a lump in his throat. Words could not fully express the depth of his gratitude. He had arrived alone, vulnerable, and uncertain. Now he was leaving with warmth in his body and strength in his spirit. He led his horse carefully out of the shelter, feeling the snow under the hooves and the soft light of the morning on his face. The horse shook itself, scattering small snowflakes into the air. The cowboy patted its neck, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. He glanced back one last time at the shelter hidden among the rocks, at the woman who had called to him in the storm. He knew he would carry the memory of this night with him for the rest of his life. As he rode slowly through the canyon, the snow sparkling under the weak morning sun, he reflected on the lessons he had learned. He had learned that courage could be quiet and steady. He had learned that trust was not given lightly, but when accepted it could save lives. He had learned that kindness, even in small acts, had the power to change a night of fear and cold into a memory of warmth and hope. The storm had tested him, pushed him to his limits, and reminded him of the unforgiving nature of the Wild West. But it had also revealed the quiet strength of those who knew the land, who respected it, and who cared for one another. The Apache woman had shown him that courage was not only about survival, but about action guided by care and wisdom. He felt a new respect for the land, for the people, and for the quiet bonds that could form even in the harshest of conditions. He rode on, leaving the shelter behind, but the fire, the warmth, and the lessons remained with him. The snow still lay thick on the ground, but the path ahead seemed clearer, not because the storm had ended, but because he had discovered a strength within himself that had been nurtured by the courage and care of others. He realized that survival was not a solitary act. It was built through trust, through shared effort, and through the willingness to act with care when it mattered most. Hours later, as he reached higher ground, he could see the landscape stretching out before him. The storm had passed fully now, leaving a quiet, pristine white world behind. The cowboy felt a sense of peace he had not known for a long time. The wind was still cold, but it no longer carried the same threat. He could hear the distant sound of a river, the soft movement of snow falling from trees, and the quiet life of the canyon beginning again after the night of chaos. The cowboy thought again of the woman and her people. He knew their lives were not easy. They faced storms, cold, and isolation with a quiet strength that he had rarely witnessed. But he also knew that their courage and care had given him something invaluable. The understanding that strength is not only physical, but also found in kindness, trust, and the willingness to act for others. He felt gratitude deep in his chest, a warmth that no fire alone could provide. As he rode farther from the shelter, the canyon opened into wider plains. The sun began to rise higher, casting long shadows across the snow and illuminating the path ahead. The cowboy adjusted his hat, feeling the warmth on his face and the strength returning to his limbs. He knew that the journey ahead would have its challenges, but he also knew he had survived the worst of the storm. He carried with him the lessons of endurance, courage, and human care, which would guide him through many more days in the Wild West. The memory of the night stayed with him. The cold, the storm, the fire, and the quiet courage of the woman who had called out to him in his moment of need. He understood that the world could be harsh, but in its midst were moments of humanity, trust, and care that made survival not only possible but meaningful. The cowboy rode on, feeling stronger, wiser, and more aware of the connections that could form even in the wildest and most unforgiving places. By the time the sun fully rose, the storm had passed completely. The canyon, the rocks, and the snow reflected the new light, sparkling and serene. The cowboy glanced back one last time at the direction of the shelter, though it was now barely visible through the soft morning light. He felt gratitude, respect, and a sense of peace. The night had tested him, the storm had challenged him, but he had endured. And he had been reminded of something powerful: the kindness of a stranger, the courage of those who care, and the warmth that human connection could provide even in the harshest conditions. He rode onward into the vast plains, the snow crunching beneath the hooves of his horse. Every step reminded him of the night he had survived, of the shelter hidden in the rocks, and of the Apache woman who had saved him without hesitation. He felt ready for the days ahead, carrying with him a new understanding of strength, endurance, and the quiet power of care. The Wild West was still vast, cold, and unforgiving, but he no longer feared it alone. The cowboy rode on into the morning light, the memory of warmth and courage guiding him. The storm had ended, but the lessons he had learned would remain with him forever. And as he disappeared into the distant hills, the shelter behind him stood as a quiet testament to resilience, trust, and human kindness in the heart of the Wild West.